So yes, I'm Susan Hanssen. I teach at the University of Dallas, and the University of Dallas is a small Catholic liberal arts college. I know that the name the University of Dallas doesn't kind of give that away, but it is, like you, like Benedictine, a small Catholic liberal arts college. We have two campuses, a campus in the great state of Texas, in the South Plains. You guys are in the Middle Plains, and I was just up visiting the University of St. Mary in Bismarck in the Northern Plains, right? We're all Great Plains people, straight down the middle of the USA, right? We also have a campus in Rome, Rome, Italy. I have to always say, because people say, is that Rome, Georgia? No, actually, Rome, Italy. Neither of our campuses are actually where we say they are. Our campus in Dallas is just outside of Dallas in a very small town. And our campus in Rome is not actually in Rome, it's on a hill outside of Rome. It's actually in the Alban Hills, about 40 minutes outside of Rome. You can see Dallas in the distance from our Irving campus, and you can see the domes of Rome and the dome of St. Peter's in the distance from our Rome campus. And this is where I wanted to start talking to you, because sitting outside of a city on a hill is actually the perfect place for having a liberal arts education. 4 years of leisure at a distance from the city, up on a hill outside of the city where you can see the city in the distance, where we can begin to contemplate the order of the city and the order of the soul. You can see the order of the city in the distance, its traffic patterns, its economic patterns, its immigration patterns, its political order. And liberal arts education begins with this analogy between the order of the city and the order of the soul that is given to us in Plato's Republic. The idea that the relationship between the city and the soul is symbiotic. And if you want to understand the city, you should understand the soul of the founders. And if you want to understand souls, right, you need to understand the regime that is shaping them over the centuries, over the years. Right? If there is disorder in the soul, it tends to spill out and infect the city. If there is disorder in the city, it tends to infect the soul. So you should not be unaware of the order and disorder in your city, in your civitas, in your civilization, right? Because it is undoubtedly affecting you. And whatever you do to recreate, reform the order in the soul will have good effects out in the city. We look at the order of the soul, the executive power of the intellect, the aristocratic power of the will, the democratic power of the passions and the appetites. We look out into our city and we wonder about the health of the executive, right? We're just a week out from an election, so maybe you've been wondering about the health of the executive, right? The health of the legislature, the health of the judiciary, both at the federal and at the local level, right? So this is our goal. 4 years of leisure before you are thrown out into, right, the careers and the responsibilities, economic responsibilities to support yourself and those who depend on you, political responsibilities of self-governance, social responsibilities, cultural, moral responsibilities, to take a little bit of time, right, a little bit of leisure for contemplating the order of the city and the order of the soul. And because American civilization is embedded within Western civilization, you cannot fully understand the American regime if you don't understand Western civilization writ large, both morally and politically. The traditions of the West helped to found the American regime. And you can't understand the order and disorder in your own souls if you don't understand the ways in which it has been shaped and how it has not been shaped by the moral and cultural and religious religious traditions of the classical and Christian West writ large. So I hope that all of you will at some point go and study in, I hear that you have a Florence program. If you want to come join us on our summer program on our Rome campus, please feel free to join us. Right? But it is against this backdrop, right, that I am interested in calling your attention to this bit of classic Americana. Little House in the Big Woods, the Little House series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I would call this classic Americana, a little icon of American civilization. So my talk today is going to be pretty much half context and half text. I'm aiming for about 20 minutes of context and about 20 minutes of text, if that's okay with you all. That might be heavy on context for some of you, if you're sort of very great booksy, right? You want to dive right into the text, and you're going to think that I didn't give you enough text, didn't really go over sufficient passages in the text. I know there are those of you out there who have that mentality, right? But I am a historian, and what historians bring to the table of the discussion of any text is the historical context. So that is, in fact, where we will begin. Usually when we think of women's history, and I am currently right now teaching a Women in American History class, when we think of women's history, we think of women's history in terms of a kind of traditional narrative of the rise of feminism. When we think of American women's history and the role of women in society, we are sort of funneled by our society into thinking first about the suffrage movement, beginning with Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the 19th century, with the amendment to give women the vote in the 1920s, one of the progressive amendments, and then onward to the post-World War II rise of a kind of second wave feminism with Betty Friedan's feminine mystique, right? And then the 1960s sexual revolution, right? So I would say that that's in most American women's history textbooks that I have encountered and that I've considered. I'm always getting free textbooks of things to use for my courses, right? And then you get flip through them and say, it looks like all the other textbooks that I've ever been given, right? There's essentially three moments in American women's history, right? There's the beginnings of the suffrage movement, in the midst of the evangelical awakening and all the other reform movements, temperance movements, and abolition movements, right, in the 19th century. And then you come to this climax, women get the vote, right? Women, participating in politics is the sort of climax of the story. And then usually some disappointment that women haven't voted as a bloc. Sometimes not just disappointment, but anger and positive rage that women refuse to vote as a bloc, right? As an oppressed class should vote, that they're not voting that way, right? And so then you have this creation of second wave feminism dealing not with political oppression, but economic and familial and social issues, right? And that's the kind of generic narrative. So what I am interested in doing in my own class and here in this talk is making the case for this little book, right? This diminutive book. Right? Remember, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that when it grows gives shelter to many in its wide branches. Right? This little book, right, which has a very large cultural life to it. I would like to make the case that probably more of you have read the Little House series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, or encountered the Little House TV series with Michael Langdon playing Pa, right, than have ever actually read, not just heard of it, read Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women, or Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique. So we have to do a little test. I'm partly a historian and partly a sociologist, so I came to Benedictine in order to ask you this sociological question. How many of you have ever read any of the Little House books series? let's say, how many of you have, if you haven't read the books, like you've read the books, seen the TV series, or at least heard of the Little House books? It's really unanimity. If you look around, this isn't just for me. You guys could look around. Especially you in the front. You should realize you're not the only ones just there in the front, right? The whole crowd behind you also raised their hands, right? So this is good. This has worked every time I've asked the question. So far, so good, right? America still reads Little House. That's what I'm learning by going around the country and talking about her. So in some sense, the feminist lit of Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women from the American Founding era, French Revolutionary era, 1776, 1789, and Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique, the sort of very beginnings of the second wave feminist movement and sexual revolution in the 1960s, are still read in academic women's history classes. But they have not become cultural classics that just have a widespread cult following, right, by the ordinary folks who are not in a women's history class. And so I would argue that Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House in the Big Woods has shaped the soul in a way in which these other books have not. That these books continue to shape the soul of American children. And if you want to understand American culture, cultural history, you actually have to understand the Little House books. Right? This is not esoteric literature, right? For the few, right? This is the literature of the masses. So I think this is a piece of classic Americana. And I would like to encourage you, as I'm talking, right, to dig the Little House books up out of your own psyche. Do a little excavation of your own memory. And then put your memories of this book before you and examine it anew. To look at what this work might have, unbeknownst to you, done to your soul, and what it is continuing to do to the soul of America. So one of the great elements of the history of modernity in the past 500 years, you always have to put women's history, American women's history in the context of American history, and American history in the larger context of modern history, is the whole moral question of how we use technology. This enormous philosophical and moral question of the relationship between is and ought, between knowledge and skill, between our ability to contemplate the forms of things and our ability to create new things or deform and reform things. This profound moral question is actually at the center of this book. At the center of this book is a technology. On the front cover of the book, I wish you all had copies of the book with you. I doubt you can see this, right? But maybe you can remember it. That's more important, right? On the front cover of this book, you have three couples, right? You've got Ma and baby Carrie, you've got Pa and Mary, and you've got Laura looking adoringly at her doll. Right? But the other character in this book, besides Jack the dog, is very evident on the back cover of the book, hanging above the front door of the Little House, and that is Pa's gun. Right? The use and the abuse of technology. There's also another major episode of technology in here that we're not going to talk about, which is the Reaper, which comes to town, and the whole question of whether you're going to use a Reaper. But we're not going to get into the Reaper. We're just going to focus on Pa's gun. Right? So I don't know if when you were little you used to play Laura Ingalls Wilder and Mary. I had an older sister who was a beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde, perfect child, never did anything wrong in her life, utterly phlegmatic. and obedient, a natural Mary. I was a rambunctious, tomboy, domineering little brat of a child, so I was a perfect little Laura. She didn't always want to play Mary because, of course, Mary goes blind, and it's only fun to play being blind for so long. So, you know, but we had plenty of brothers to play the dog and the baby for being baby Carrie. But I don't think we noticed the centrality of Pa's gun, right? Although you do learn in the first chapter how to load Pa's gun, how to clean Pa's gun, and how to make bullets. So this is not just a girl's book. This is universally a boy and girl children's literature book, right? If you're going to learn how to make bullets in chapter 1, right? So you learn in chapter 1 immediately what Pa's gun is for. It's made up front very clear to you. It is there for the protection of the family. You can hear wolves in the distance. And it is there to provide for the family. When you wake up in the morning, there is a dead deer, and there's your venison for the winter hanging from the tree outside of the window of the log cabin. So there is this sort of opening chapter positivity, right, towards the technology of Pa's gun, right, and its place in the family. But over the course of the book, it is gradually made clear that the family is not whole and not safe without the complementarity between male and female, between Ma and Pa, between what Henry Adams famously called the dynamo and the virgin, the power of technology and the power of contemplation, the power of openness to the divine. So I began by looking at the front cover and the back cover, right? And I do want to dwell on this idea of a world of images. We are living in a very strange time. I've lived half my life before the internet and half my life after the internet. So I'm able to look on your generation as a strange and unusual form of creature that doesn't know what it's like to live without the internet or a cell phone. So I'm only partially acclimated to your world, right? And I find all of you sort of unusual. We are since the internet, right? We are inundated with images. Right? Once upon a time, if I said to you, Imago Dei, man is made in the image and likeness of God. Michelangelo's creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Right? If your parents had an art history book at home, you might have seen that image. If not, you would have to go out of class, go to the library, go to a card catalog, and find the little index card that had the book number on it, and then go to that part of the library and find the art history book where you would find a grainy black and white photo of God creating Adam and the famous fingers, right, of the divine spark of the Imago Dei, right? Now you just say, Siri, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, creation of Adam. Oh, it is full color, excellent pixels. I can expand it and see those fingers really well, right? Is there an electric spark between the fingers or not, right? Inundated with images, right? And part of what the Little House book teaches, part of what Laura Ingalls Wilder teaches, part of what Ma teaches, is how to cultivate our childlike capacity to see natural images anew, as if for the first time. And in particular, to see the images of male and female, he created them anew, fresh, as if for the first time. Okay, let me give you you thought I was already giving you a broad historical context. I'm not done with the context. Hold on a second. Right, I've got maybe with 2 more layers of context to give you before we dive into the text. Is that okay with you? more context. So Laura Ingalls Wilder, this is an autobiographical story, as I'm sure you are aware. This is an autobiographical story. Laura Ingalls Wilder is living in the little house on the frontier in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Little Laura Ingalls Wilder and the family moving west in their covered wagon just ahead of the railroads, escaping from civilization. Every time civilization comes closer to them, Pa says, let's move, right? And off they go to deeper frontier, right? Laura Ingalls Wilder is living out on the frontier during the heyday of the American frontier, right? The glory days of the American frontier, right? When Frederick Jackson Turner, Harvard historian, president of the American Historical Association, is writing his famous address saying that the most significant factor in American history and American culture and the shaping of American culture is the experience on the frontier. And Laura Ingalls Wilder is living it. Right? This movement of homesteads, right, out into the frontier, further and further away from the growing influence of Cosmopolis, right? The growing influence of the metropolitan center, right? Like hobbits fleeing Mordor, right? This movement of Pa, right, who does not want to be hemmed in by the city, right? Moving out into the rural areas from the urban centers, right? We're only a week out from an election that was largely determined by the contrast between the urban vote and the rural vote, right? 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, right? The development of the Transcontinental Railroad, right? Coming together in the Rocky Mountains. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of green. Right? It's written at the same time, right? Sort of classic Americana. Right? But Laura Ingalls Wilder is not writing this in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Laura Ingalls Wilder is writing this in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. She's writing this in the interwar periods between World War I and World War II. She's writing it in the midst of the Depression. And so Laura Ingalls Wilder is writing the Little House books from a position of nostalgia, looking back at an older America. And she's writing it, it's very interesting, right? She's writing it just as American society has shifted from being majority rural to majority urban. She is writing these books for two kinds of people. Two kinds of Americans. The Americans of the Great Migration from rural to city, and the Americans of this huge Ellis Island migration fleeing totalitarianism in Europe. The Italians fleeing the rise of the Italian nation state. The Poles, Czechs, Ukrainians, Croatians fleeing the rise of Russia and centralization of Russia. Right? All of the southern Germans and Bavarians, Catholic Germans, coming over, fleeing the rise of Prussianized Germany. So both of those groups, I'm actually kind of intrigued by this moment of the 1930s Depression, right? When the Americans who are coming from the rural areas, right, coming into the cities, are meeting up with this new wave of Catholic immigration. It's the first time we have primarily Catholic immigration, right? Before we had white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant migration from the British Isles. By the 1920s, we've got Italians, Poles, Irish. It's going to move on to Puerto Ricans, Cubans, right? Majority Catholic immigration. I'm particularly interested in this because this is very much my own family story. My great-grandmother moved from Tennessee when their land got flooded by the Tennessee Valley Association trying to dam up the rivers and give them electricity under the New Deal project. And so they lost everything in Tennessee and moved to Chicago, where they met up with Poles and Irish, and that's the sort of mix. Right? This is the Ingalls Wilder is writing, right? A moment of turmoil, of urbanization, of the collapse of our economy in the Depression, and she is directing her audience's eyes back to American life on the frontier, to the household, to the homestead, to the life of Ma and Pa. Right? These books are drenched with nostalgia. Right? And I hope that you guys here at Benedictine Abbey, especially those of you who are taking part in a kind of Great Books and Liberal Arts program, right? I hope that the word nostalgia has a deep resonance for you, right? Nostos, right? Your desire for home, right? This kind of longing for home. Right? So, Laura Ingalls Wilder writes a series of children's books, starting in 1932, then 1933, 1934, 1935, 1936, 1937, 1938, 1939. It's already achieved extraordinary success by the time of World War II. The publishers did not expect this at all. No one expected this little book, right, to take off the way that it took off, selling millions. Right? So by the time you hit World War II, right, and America's participation on the world stage in a big way, sorry, but World War I was not in a big way, right? It's not a big way, but we won't go to that. Right? By the time we're participating on the world stage in a big way, right, as shapers of global culture, right, Little House has already become established. She continues writing it 1940, 1941, 1942, which makes her, let me just point out, I got my degree in both British and American intellectual and cultural history. I'm very interested in the relationship between British and American culture. This makes Laura Ingalls Wilder a contemporary of C.S. Lewis. A contemporary of C.S. Lewis writing The Abolition of Man and what technology is doing to our understanding of natural law and wiping out our understanding of natural law in the soul. Right? These are the same years that C.S. Lewis is writing The Abolition of Man and Mere Christianity and giving them as BBC wartime talks over the radio during the bombing of London. Another talk, if you want me to come back, I'll talk about Abolition of Man and the bombing of London. That would be fun. At any rate, just keep that in mind, right? These are going on simultaneously, right? This little woman writing these little children's books, right, and C.S. Lewis spouting natural law and mere Christianity over the BBC, right? With the 1950s, 60s, right, when the American dream becomes possible for so many of those immigrants moving out of the cities into suburbs, the dream of owning your own home, right? Okay, maybe it's in a cul-de-sac in a little community where all the homes look exactly the same, right? But nevertheless, 1950s, right? These books have already become established as icons of American culture, right? These are not school books. These are bedtime story books. Right? These are books that are read in the home by parents to children. Right? This is part of the naturalization process, the assimilation process for all of those immigrants who fought in World War II, got GI Bill money, were able to go to college and therefore get their own home. And the American dream was real for them. And part of that was reading to your children about Ma and Pa in their homestead, right? When you own your own home for the first time, right? Sorry, I'm gonna get kind of emotional. You should definitely watch the movie Avalon, which is about a Jewish family who had relatives who died in concentration camps in the Holocaust, right? Moving into a kind of urban ghetto in Baltimore, and then little by little moving out to the suburbs, right? But this is exactly the kind of period that, so it's a package, right? The pre-war, wartime, post-war period of the establishment, I would say, of Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House books as an American classic, right? She goes along with Norman Rockwell's paintings, right? If you don't know who Norman Rockwell is, then that's disturbing, and write him down and ask Siri as soon as you leave this room. She's Norman Rockwell paints a picture of the 4 freedoms that FDR said we were fighting for in World War II. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. And the freedom from fear is a couple tucking in their little children in bed, and the dad has under his arm a rolled up newspaper that has stories of the destruction of the cities in Europe, right? Freedom from fear, right? Bedtime stories, right? This is what we fought the war for, was freedom from fear for our children, right? The security. So Laura Ingalls Wilder is a big part of that. Okay, almost there. Part 1, when she lived it, the era of the frontier, 1870s, right? Part 2, when she wrote it, 1930s, the Depression. And part 3, when she has an afterlife here, right? So the 1970s is a moment of implosion of American patriotism. Right? Race riots, riots in the cities, anti-Vietnam War protests, depression in the economy, foreign policy problems, hostages, right? It's just a kind of implosion of American patriotism. So much so that a lot of American patriotic concerts were not drawing crowds anymore, and so they, in a fit of desperation, they decided to have 4th of July concerts outside and time the fireworks to the 1812 Overture to get people's attention, which is a great American tradition for the 4th of July. Anyways, you have this kind of implosion of American patriotism, and in that dark moment, as in the Depression, the country turns to Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House, and she's turned into a TV miniseries. Right? So she has a second life. I was introduced to her first on TV and only secondarily as a bedtime story. Right? I saw her first on TV and then was roped into reading her as a bedtime story to my younger siblings. Right? And especially we would read Laura Ingalls Wilder books on long road trips, because you had to see how heroic they were on long road trips in a covered wagon across the plains. So you could at least be a little bit, patient in your air-conditioned vehicle, where you could find some McDonald's along the way. So this was Ronald Reagan's favorite TV series, right? And he talked about this a lot, but this was his favorite TV series, and the 1980s Ronald Reagan moment, right? Which was kind of the first MAGA moment, the first Make America Great Again moment, right? We're not gonna allow patriotism to implode, right? We're proud of what America is, and we can defeat the evil empire of Soviet communism. Also, kind of had Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House cultural image in its back pocket, right? Okay, so I always feel like I have to make a huge case for reading a children's book and taking it seriously. So this was my huge case for taking this text seriously. Are you ready to look at the text then? You'll admit that it's not just cute, there might be something to it. It might be an image of the American soul, maybe, possibly, right? The American soul's not dead yet, right? Mostly dead, hardly alive. Right? The chocolate coating makes it go down easier. All right, so we open it up to the table of contents, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist reader when you look at the table of contents to see what's going on. And that is that this book is organized around the 4 seasons. Winter days and winter nights. Going to town in the spring. Summertime. Harvest. It's not hard to see. Right? But as you read it, you realize that this book is not just organized around the 4 seasons, but the 4 seasons are, in some sense, tagged to the 4 cardinal virtues. Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. So immediately, Laura Ingalls Wilder, right, is the end of a long thread, right, that goes all the way back to Plato's Republic and the four cardinal virtues, to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics and the four cardinal virtues, to Seneca's Morals, to Cicero's moral duties, right, to St. Thomas Aquinas, who sees the four cardinal virtues as the natural foundation on which you would build the three theological virtues, to George Washington, who had Cicero's On Duties in his library at Mount Vernon, and used for his handwriting practice a book called Rules of Civil and Decent Behavior, which walk you through prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. This tradition of developing these deep ordering principles and habits of the soul, right, is ubiquitous in Western civilization. And Laura Ingalls Wilder is speaking to us with a very gentle, very feminine voice, but with a voice that resonates with that tradition of Western civilization. In the fall, you need prudence. If you don't save some of your food, you will starve in the winter. In the fall, right, prudence gives you foresight, looking into the past, how much you made, right, how much you grew, looking into the future, right, how you could possibly make this ready to be stored, right, so that it will last over the course of the winter and not mold. Right. Winter, you need fortitude. Fortitude, for us, it says winter days and winter nights. Right. Winter days, which are so short, winter nights, which are so long. During the winter period, there's also, along with the fortitude that you need to get through winter, you also learn about the fortitude that you need to get you through Sunday. Especially these old Protestant Sundays where you're not allowed to do anything except read the Bible. Right? And so the fortitude, the strength, right, that you need to get through Sundays. And there's all these discussions of, well, your Sundays aren't as bad as Dad's Sundays, but Dad's Sundays weren't as bad as Grandpa's Sundays. Sundays have been hard for a long time. You think you need fortitude, right? You get to spring, and in the spring, you need justice. The question of distributive justice, right? You have all of this stuff growing, right? It's your first time taking it into town to trade it, right? And so questions of trade and exchange and tit-for-tat justice and back and forth, right? How much of Pa's venison are you going to sell to get Ma calico? And if you get a cookie, and you cut the cookie in half, so that half is for Laura and half is for Mary, then how much does Carrie get? Oh, shoot. Okay, well, each of us will give her a half of hers. No, now she's got half, and we've only got a quarter. Right? There's all these very complicated justice questions going on in this book. Right? Until you finally get to really, not just distributive, tit-for-tat, egalitarian exchange questions of justice, but fundamental questions about the justice of the universe. Some girls have golden blonde curls, and some girls have boring brown hair. And some people are little girls and have to sit and talk, and some people are boys who can climb trees. This seems fundamentally unjust in the cosmos. these are all questions that are definitely these are all in here, right? There's a little tomboy Laura. There's a photo to go along with it. Actually, does say at one point, once she encounters a boy who's got really great shoes for climbing trees, and he climbs trees and she's not allowed to, that she wishes she was a boy. Oh yes, even that is in the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House books, right? She deals with just about everything. Everything you could possibly face. Summer, you need temperance, right? The abundancia of summer. Let's eat it all now. Right? The restraint, the self-mastery that you need, right? And maybe I shouldn't be talking about that right before Thanksgiving. I think that the greatest tradition of Thanksgiving is not turkey. The greatest Thanksgiving of turkey is not pies. And the greatest tradition of Thanksgiving is not gravy. And the greatest tradition of Thanksgiving is not stuffing. The greatest tradition of Thanksgiving is seconds. Thirds. I tried to explain this when I was living abroad in England. I tried to make them a Thanksgiving dinner, and then they were like, no, thank you, the British are very moderate people, right? No, thank you, I've had enough. And you're like, no, but seconds are part of it. Like, they're not optional on Thanksgiving, right? It's just rude, right? So summer is for temperance, right? And then we head back into winter days and winter nights, and we start all of the training of the virtues all over again. It is Ma's voice, even more than Pa's voice, that speaks with the authority of this moral tradition. Alexis de Tocqueville says, as he observes American life, that it is women who are the makers of mores. Now, feminists hate this book. I've said this before, and then I got trolled by a lot of people who said, well, I'm a feminist and I don't hate this book. And then you like read further in their comments and you realize they do hate this book and they think it's chauvinist and racist and like just a product of its time. And, you know, so I was like, what do you mean you don't hate this book? You just showed you hate this book. Of course you hate this book. Anyway, feminists hate this book because, as they say, when Pa says we're moving, they move. And Ma is submissive. What they really don't like is that Pa gets to do all the talking, right? Pa goes out every day to go hunting and has adventures. And then Pa comes back every night, and around the fire, he tells the story of his adventures. So he gets to do all the talking. He doesn't just talk, he sings, right? He's a sort of jovial fellow with a fiddle, right? These are the Scots-Irish, sort of the bluegrass people of our American tradition, right? Pa is wildly funny. He's a character. Meanwhile, Ma seems to make little approving and disapproving noises in the background. She just kind of says, yes, Charles. No, Charles. I wouldn't, Charles. My favorite part is when Pa is playing wolf with the kids, and he gets a little bit too realistic, and Ma has to say, Charles, look at their eyes. They're terrified. Cut the game, right? If it's a question of just counting up quotation marks, right? And there's a whole breed of scholar these days, right, who just like to count things. I don't think they know how to read. They're sort of like quantitative analysts, and they're like, Pa had more quotations, ergo. Pa is the dominant figure in the text. You're like, try reading, right? If it's just a question of comparing quotation marks, right, it is true, right, that the male voice versus the female voice in quotation marks, Pa wins. But I would argue that Ma's voice doesn't need quotation marks. Ma's voice has invaded Laura's mind. Some of you might be familiar with this from your own mothers. Ma's voice has invaded Laura's mind. When Laura talks like Ma. Laura thinks like Ma. Laura ventriloquizes Ma. Ma's voice isn't in quotation marks because Ma, through Laura, has become the narrator. She's far more dominant than anyone in quotation marks, by the way. The authoritative voice of what ought to be done, right? The voice of conscience, the voice of the way things are done around here, the way things have always been done. Right? The voice of natural law. Pa's voice is opinionable, right? I say it dismissively. I shouldn't say that so dismissively, right? But Pa's part of what Pa does educationally is he shows the children constantly that he too has made mistakes. He too has found it very hard to live up to the natural law. he too, as a child, wasn't good at prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Pa messes up regularly, right? So Pa teaches the children that it's okay to be human, right? Ma says, no, it's not. Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, right? This is why Pa is kind of so fun, right? But he also makes serious mistakes of judgment, like playing wolf a little bit too rambunctiously and terrifying small children, right? He's made serious mistakes that you hear about. He's been very mischievous, right? This is why it's dangerous for Pa to have a gun, because he might not just use it to protect and to provide, right? Technology in his hands could go wrong, right? If he's not trained to use it well. And you hear all the time in his bedtime stories about how he's messed up, right? And how he constantly needs to be disciplined by his grandfather. I mean, heck, he even tells a story about going out in the woods and confusing a tree for a bear, right? I mean, Pa's eyesight's not so good, right? Pa's moral vision, right? He doesn't always get what he's supposed to be shooting at, right? Like, that's a tree, buddy. Anyway, so, like, but Ma, right? Ma, I mean, personally, I find Ma and Mary hard to deal with, right? I'm like little Laura, right? I like the rambunctious stories about how it's hard to live virtue. I think it's very realistic. But if you want to know what to do in the morning, at noon, in the evening, if you want to know what to do on Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, if you want to know what you're supposed to be doing in the spring, in the summer, in the autumn, and in the winter, that's Ma for you, right? Let me give you an example. I'm in love with this example. It's just a brief little example from the text. Aren't you glad that I'm going to open up the book and look at the text? So, early on in the book, you hear about doing chores. That might not sound exciting. Laura and Mary helped Ma with the work. Every morning, there were dishes to wipe. Mary wiped more of them than Laura because she was bigger, but Laura always wiped carefully her own little cup and plate. By the time the dishes were all wiped and set away, the trundle bed was aired. Then, standing one on each side, Laura and Mary straightened the covers, tucked them in well at the foot and sides, plumped up the pillows, and put them in place. Then Ma pushed the trundle bed into its place under the big bed. After this was done, Ma began the work that belonged to that day. Each day had its own proper work. Ma used to say, wash on Monday, iron on Tuesday, mend on Wednesday, churn on Thursday, clean on Friday, bake on Saturday, rest on Sunday. Laura liked the churning and baking days best of all the week. So, that's in chapter 1. You learn what work belongs to what day. Towards the end of the book, they go into town in the spring for the first time. Now, if you've lived in a log cabin in the middle of the big woods, ever since you were little and you've never been to town, you've never seen anything but big woods, big woods, big woods, big woods, dog jack, wolves, bear, deer, venison, cows, pigs, big woods, right? This is very exciting, right? The day you go to town, okay? Laura had never imagined so many houses, and they were so close together. People were living in all these houses. Smoke rose up from their chimneys. Though it was not Monday, some woman had spread out a washing on the bushes and stumps by her house. And what the heck? It's not Monday. She's doing her laundry. Like, I've never met anyone. Well, I mean, you never met anyone. Right? Women are makers of mores, right? There are absolute morals. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, right? There are the changeable manners of different societies in different ages and in different places. I mean, I live in Irving, Texas. There's a large Indian population from southern India. They think that it's very reverential to take off your shoes in church, right? whereas like people in Texas, most people in Texas don't think it's like reverent to take off your shoes in church, right? Those are just manners, right? Mores is that middle ground where you navigate, right? Manners that can change and can be done differently in different ways, in different times, in different places, right? And those great natural law commandments that cannot be changed from time to time and place to place. Right? The navigators of that, right, are those who work on mores. And this is Ma's work. Let me give you two other, how are we doing on time here? Any idea?
5 or 10 more minutes.
Okay, very good. I just need to make sure that I have a kind of grand finale. Let's see if maybe I should do grand finale now. Means skipping two beautiful things. Okay, I can't entirely skip them. So I know, I'll cut back. It's okay. I was going to give you two examples of how Ma's voice is transformed into the narrative voice. So when they're making food, they're taking the raw materials and resources that Pa has brought to them. And as it says in the text, now Pa goes back to the woods, but butchering time had only just begun for Ma and the girls, right? Because you have to take this and you have to turn it into something both that will last, right? It won't go bad. But she doesn't just turn it into something that will be useful. Ma also turns it into something that will be beautiful. And so at the end of each paragraph of learning how to make sausage, learning how to churn butter, there's this little voice of deep satisfaction at work well done. And now we won't starve through the winter. And that will be the sausage, and that will be the cheese, and this will be the butter, and this will be the cream. A little comment of satisfaction. And along with that process, right, is the process of making it beautiful, making it edible, right? Something that tastes good and looks good. Right? I don't know if anyone has any memory of the churning butter episode, right? So you learn all about churning butter, and it goes on for like 3 pages. It's great. But Ma comments that in the winter, the milk is not as golden as it is in the summer. And so she dyes it slightly with a bit of carrot to give it a golden color. And then she puts it in a little mold that has a strawberry and 2 leaves on it. And she makes little pats of butter using this strawberry leaf mold, right? And it says that the girls watched breathlessly, right, as each of the little golden butter pats with strawberry leaves, came out of its mold, right? They're kind of in awe of this. So not only does Ma speak with the authority of the great tradition of moral thinking, but she also is teaching the girls the value of beauty and seeing beauty. She's training their eyes. Very quickly, I'll just mention this in passing. Ma has brought 2 things from the East Coast, and when she brings them out, there is a kind of gasp, right, as at the sublime. Right? At Christmas, right, it says she's going to wear her Delane dress, and Laura says, it showed how important this event was that Ma was going to take out the Delane dress, right, that had little sprigs of flowers all over it. And then also she brought her China Shepherdess. These are not Mexican Americans, it's not Our Lady of Guadalupe, these are not Italian Americans, it's not Madonna and Child, right? It's not Irish Americans, it's not the Sacred Heart, right? But it's a bit of decor. And it's the only decor, right? It's the only decoration that they have in the little house is Ma's China Shepherdess. And there's this wonderful moment where Pa is creating a Christmas present for Ma. And he's making a little bracket for the wall Ma's China Shepherdess. And it's, again, takes 3 or 4 pages, right, where he's rubbing down the wood and making it nice and silky smooth. And he's carving little stars and moons and flowers and curlicues. And it says, making anything that he thought Ma would find beautiful. Kind of extraordinary moment where Pa is, through the eyes of Ma, right, trying to understand, right, what she would find beautiful. Right? So she's not just training the little girls, right, in the beautiful, but she also has a role in training Pa in the beautiful. Right? To see the difference between beautiful and the ugly, the noble and the base, between things and persons. Look at their eyes. Right? It might be a fun game for you, but look what you're doing to the little person inside. Right? And so all of these questions of all of these episodes of beauty in the book line up actually in a training in how beautiful brown is. So Ma's Delane dress is actually brown with sprigs of flowers all over it, and the bracket is a beautiful, smooth brown wood. At one point, Laura slaps Mary because Mary had gotten a compliment on her beautiful hair, and she just thinks the world is utterly unjust. And this being a good old-fashioned book, Laura gets whipped. But after she gets whipped for slapping Laura, Pa takes her on his lap, and she asks him, "You don't think that brown hair is better than gold hair, do you?" And he says, "Well, my hair is brown." And as if she noticed for the first time that Pa's hair was brown, that his whiskers were a beautiful brown, that his violin is a beautiful brown, right? So there's this kind of like training in the beauty of brown throughout the book, which is kind of fascinating. Until we get to the end where Pa is out hunting, and he notices, as he's up in the tree, there's a kind of threefold moment when he's up in the tree, going hunting to get venison for his little girls, to tide them over the winter. And he sees a doe, and I love it, it says the fawn-colored fawn, right? There's a little brown-colored brown baby deer. And he sees their big eyes in the moonlight. He sees the mother with the baby, and he can't kill them. And he says, we'll have to, no more hunting for this season. We have to wait until all of the deer grow up. And when he comes back to the house, Laura Ingalls, or little Laura, he tells the story, and Laura says, "I'm glad you didn't shoot the deer." She's kind of become mom, training Pa's eye for beauty, and that beauty is a signifier, right, of something much more valuable. Okay, as a grand finale, I'll just say that, sorry to call it grand finale, that's maybe a little bit pompous, but it's not my grand finale, it's her grand finale, it's the grand finale of the book, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Is that this training in beauty culminates in a realization that the beautiful is a window into the eternal. It's a promise of eternity. When we see beautiful things, it makes us think that it might be possible, right? That there is a larger sort of cosmic harmony and beauty, right? That will go on beyond us, right? And one of the beautiful images that the book works the hardest at giving you is bedtime itself. So it's a bedtime story in which the girls go to bed in the winter, they go to bed in the spring, they go to bed in the summer, they go to bed in the fall, right? There's always the discussion of the day's events, the adventures of the day. There's singing with Pa's fiddle, right? And you've gotten used to this over the course of the book. To such an extent that when you get to the last page, and it's a bedtime episode, even if you have never had a happy, safe, secure bedtime with a ma and a pa and a fireplace, fireplace and a fiddle and a mantelpiece, you can remember such bedtimes because you've been through 4 of them over the course of the book. They have entered into your memory bank as something that you can have nostalgia for, right? So the book ends with this incredible reflection on nostalgia, right? On nostos. And nostos is this sort of extraordinary feeling of missing something from the past, usually that you cannot recover. You can't recover anything from the past, right? Because we're not like we were in the past. We've changed, right? We're no longer as innocent as we were when we were children and reading this book. Right? So we can't recover that, right? But the memory of it, memoria, triggers a longing for something like it, some fulfillment of that memory in the future. So it's a very complex backwards and forwards longing. Right? And this concept is everywhere in Western civilization, right? From Virgil, right? The tears of things, the lacrima rerum, right? The understanding of the passing of things and at the same time of their value. Right? Okay, so here we have how Laura puts it. When Laura and Mary had said their prayers and were tucked snugly under the trundle bed's covers, Pa was sitting in the firelight with the fiddle. Ma had blown out the lamp because she did not need its light. On the other side of the hearth, she was swaying gently in her rocking chair, and her knitting needles flashed in and out above the sock she was knitting. The long winter evenings of firelight and music had come again. Pa's fiddle wailed while Pa was singing. Pa's strong, sweet voice was softly singing. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne? For days of old lang syne, my friend, for days of old lang syne. Do you want to join? When the fiddle had stopped singing, Laura called out softly, "What are the days of old lang syne, Pa?" And it's fascinating, right, that we English speakers in 2024 don't translate that phrase in that song. It's sort of the bit of old Scots that we all know. And of course you know what it means, even if you don't technically know the meaning of the words. You can't not know what it means or else you're not human, right? What are the days of old lang syne, Pa? They are the days of a long time ago, Laura, Pa said. Go to sleep now. But Laura lay awake a little while, listening to Pa's fiddle softly playing and to the lonely sound of the wind in the big woods. She looked at Pa sitting on the bench by the hearth, the firelight glistening on his brown hair and brown beard, and glistening on the honey brown fiddle. She looked at Ma, gently rocking and knitting, and she thought to herself, this is now. She was glad that the cozy house and Pa and Ma and the firelight and the music were now. It could not be forgotten, she thought, because now is now, and it can never be a long time ago. I didn't give you much time for questions, and if you need to go, I understand because I was over time, so it's not rude to zip out. But maybe we have 5 minutes for questions? Yeah. 7, 10. Thoughts? I'll even take thoughts, not just questions. As long as they're short thoughts.
Thank you for being here. My name is Luke Steinhaus. Really enjoyed your talk. I've always personally had somewhat of a beef with Pa for not shooting the deer when I was young. Just practically looking at it, it seemed like he put his own feelings in front of his daughters, knowing that he wasn't going to be able to bring home food for them to eat
So, well, two things. I mean, one is that the simple answer is, I mean, we don't usually kill doe and fawn. You do wait until you can get a nice big, male deer with all of his antlers, and then you brag about his antlers, right? That's how it's done. So.
Well, he waits though, because then there's like two more things that come by, right?
It's true. The bear comes by. Those are before, right? The doe is the grand finale. But you said whether he lets his feelings get ahead of what he actually needs to do to take care of the family. But I would argue that if you're reading through the book, you realize that those feelings have been trained in him by Ma and his daughters, right? That his sense of what is sort of beautiful and charming about, you're gonna think I'm crazy when I say this, but like it's a little Madonna and child, right? It's a little deer and baby deer, right? But like the value, right, that he places in, he describes, right, how they're sort of tender with each other, and he can see their eyes going in. And the eyes are always very important, right? You're dealing with something that's closer to like person than thing, right? That he recognizes that element, right? This is not natural to Pa. Like this has been trained in Pa, right? So I think at least in the world of the Little House books, it's considered a good thing, right? In some sense, he's matured, but it might be disappointing when you want venison.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, thanks for coming. I'm not a student here, I do work here. I just thought the topics and themes you were talking about are very important. And I have a lot of questions. I've been pondering a number of them for a number of years. I was born in a place very far away from here. I'm very new to Kansas. I came here in July. I am the eldest born son of a German refugee and a Swedish refugee who were trapped on the other side of the wall. I was mostly born and raised in New York, so the names like Anthony and Stanton and Seneca Falls, they're names that I'm familiar with, places I've been. I was hoping we could just go a little bit bigger with the picture, and maybe also related to the feminine mystique, which I also read earlier this year. I was wondering, in terms of this idea of domestic femininity or feminine domesticity, regardless of the syntax you want to use, as we can relate it to the work we just spoke on. I was wondering if you think that Ma's position within the house, her assumption of that role, do you think that her occupying that role is an empowerment of her through the natural laws that some would say govern all of us in this room? Or do you think it is a relegation? Do you think she has agency as the mother? Do you think she's relegated within that household as the matriarch in that household?
I definitely think that Ma has agency in the household, and sometimes the household wouldn't exist without Ma, right? That there's a fine balance that has to go on in this household, right? As I say, sort of the balance between the acceptance and use of technology, right? And learning how to use technology for human ends, and what are human ends, right? And that there's that Ma and Pa are playing different roles, right, in the education of the girls and those things. So there's the household is not just an economic unit in this in this book. And you asked kind of how to compare Laura Ingalls Wilder to Betty Friedan's feminine mystique. In some sense, that would be thank you for the challenge. At some point, I'll give a larger talk and a longer talk comparing the two, because of course technology is also very central to Betty Friedan's experience in the 1950s household, where she feels like she's being phased out by technology. She's being phased out by by vacuum cleaners, phased out by Cuisinarts, phased out by, you know, yeah. And so Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House in the Big Woods shows that there's a certain thing that Ma does that isn't economic and can't be replaced by technology, right? Ma can't be phased out, right? As long as Ma understands what her primary role there is, which is not just the economic sustenance of this little society, but actually it's sort of moral flourishing. Right? So yeah, that's a bigger talk, but that would be fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for the idea.
May I go a little bit further?
Sure.
So in Renan's book, she was trying to find what would make the generality of women in whatever geographical location happy. She mentioned things like just caregiving, nurturing, raising babies, all the days that we're in Little House on the Prairie, things like that. I guess for them, it's kind of saying that there's a monotony in it that's a bit soul crushing, and the feminine mystique, it's kind of like what does make us happy. On a personal note, you also spoke of Urcom, which is personally something that's destroyed my family over the years. My family's always answered the call, no matter who was in power. Some of us came back and some of us didn't. I came back, but no matter who came back or what, there's still just this lasting effect. I personally think that men are very built to go out and hunt like cause. I personally think that men are built to grind. Men are built to go to war. I never regretted any of those things. I don't think it put me in a position such as the women in Renan's book. I was maybe thinking there's just something there wasn't an obvious answer as to why maybe I feel like men or myself just individually are okay with the things that I've done. To speak very candidly, my mother is a very neurotic and very miserable person, like the woman Renan's spoke of in her book. I was wondering maybe you could just help me unpackage that.
So I'll just, I don't know when, perhaps you know, when Joseph Pieper's book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, was written. But Joseph Pieper is a German philosopher who spent some time in a Nazi prison. And so he was writing in the 1930s and 1940s at this time. He lived on, and so some of his books are later in the 60s and 70s. But he has a very famous classic work on liberal education and kind of how Germany needs new education after the war that's called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And I think that what you see, I think what you see in this Little House book is that what with Sundays, what with holidays, there's a lot of emphasis on Christmas, Sundays, holidays, harvest festivals, we're coming up on Thanksgiving, but also the evening, the family spending time together in the evening, singing and telling stories, right? That the monotony of the kind of work that is easily replaced by technology, right? The mind-numbing, soul-destroying, right, work is not just women's work, right? But can also be men's work, right? And that both are liberated by those moments of leisure. And I don't know, in the world of this book, I don't know if I would make this general, but in the world of this book, there's a certain sense in which Ma has to, I don't know. I'd have to look at this book for this purpose. I'd have to reread the book with this question in mind. Who's sort of the enforcer of leisure, right? Against a culture of workaholism, right? A culture of all techne all the time, right? But definitely Ma inspires it, right? So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I would highly recommend Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Might be the key to this.
I would take one more.
One more question. Yes.
What is your opinion
the series. I have read the whole series, and I do love the ones where Laura Ingalls Wilder becomes a school teacher. Maybe that's somehow how I got into being a school teacher. But this first one, when they're youngest, you know, these are, and I like the simplicity of the food making episodes. I think that when you do a lot of intellectual work, and you're a professor and all you do is read, and all you do is grade, and all you do is, like, you know, correct people's, you know, papers and stuff like that, that it's really good to sort of put all that aside and dive into, like, pie baking for Thanksgiving in a big way, and, like, just go with Ma, you know, like, get your hands dirty with some pumpkin and some, you know, apples for the pies, you know. So I think these earlier ones, I think, they're inspiring